The woman in the next cell cries every Thursday night, always at exactly the same time. Right after final count, the guards pretend not to hear her anymore. Prisons teach people how to ignore suffering professionally. I understood that kind of professionalism long before I got here. The first building cracked 3 months after families moved in. Not during an earthquake, not during a storm, just an ordinary Tuesday morning. A woman hanging laundry from a 7th-floor balcony heard something snap deep inside the walls. Not loud enough to panic people immediately, just sharp enough to make them uncomfortable. The newspapers called it structural fatigue. I called it something else privately. A warning. The lights inside this prison never fully turn off. Even at 3 in the morning, there's still enough fluorescent light leaking beneath the door to remind you where you are. Concrete walls. Metal bed. Distant footsteps echoing through corridors that smell like bleach and old regret. Sometimes I think that's why I keep talking now. Because silence sounds too similar to the offices where I ruined my life. People think dangerous buildings look dangerous. They don't. Most of the towers I approved looked beautiful from the street. Dark, reflective windows, fresh concrete, small decorative trees outside the entrances so middle-income families could feel successful when carrying groceries through the lobby. That's what architecture becomes eventually. Emotional engineering. You convince people they're safe long before you prove it. I became a structural engineer because my father believed buildings were moral objects. He spent 30 years inspecting bridges, never missed a report, never signed paperwork he hadn't verified personally. When I was 12, he took me beneath an overpass during a storm. Rainwater poured through the concrete seams while trucks passed overhead like distant thunder. He pointed at the support columns and said something I still hear constantly in this place. People survive because invisible things hold. There's a woman 2 cells down serving time for arson. She asked me once how many people I tried to kill. I told her none. She laughed for almost a minute straight. Then she leaned against the bars and said something I still think about every night. You just used mathematics instead of gasoline. That's the truth nobody says directly during construction meetings. Every steel beam, every reinforced joint, every additional support column, someone in the room is quietly calculating how much profit disappears because of it. Developers never ask engineers to break laws openly. They ask softer questions. Are these requirements absolutely necessary? Could the structure still pass with small revisions? What would you do if this were your project? Professional corruption rarely begins with demands. It begins with permission. My husband became sick around the same time the housing market exploded. Kidney disease. Complications that required endless treatment. Hospitals are very polite places to become financially destroyed. Everyone speaks softly while handing you documents that dismantle your future, one payment at a time. Insurance only covered part of it. The rest arrived monthly in white envelopes I stopped opening immediately because the numbers made my chest tighten. At first, I worked longer hours, took additional consulting projects, skipped sleep. But debt moves faster than exhaustion. There was a hotel project near the waterfront. 12 floors. Narrow footprint. Aggressive timeline. The developer wanted fewer steel reinforcements in the foundation columns. I explained the structure technically required more lateral resistance to remain fully compliant during seismic stress. He smiled during the meeting and slid the budget sheet toward me anyway. "You engineers always overbuild." That's what he said. Then he mentioned another firm willing to approve the revisions faster. I remember driving home afterward and sitting in my car for almost an hour without turning off the engine. Hospital bills covered the kitchen table. My husband asleep upstairs, connected to machines neither of us could afford much longer. Medical equipment humming softly through the hallway like another clock counting down our future. And somewhere inside my head, a sentence formed quietly. The building will probably never experience a major earthquake anyway. That was the real beginning. Not the forged reports, not the inspections I lied through later. That sentence. People imagine moral collapse as dramatic. It isn't. Most of the time, it sounds reasonable while it's happening. I altered the calculations late that night. The office was empty except for cleaning staff downstairs. Rain hitting the window softly. Computer fans humming. I reduced the structural requirements by 11%. Not enough to trigger immediate concern, just enough to save the developer millions. The software approved the revisions instantly. Green verification checkmark, no alarms, no warnings. Just a cursor blinking quietly while I stared at the screen. After that, it became easier. One project turned into 3, then 7. I learned exactly how much you could remove before inspectors noticed, how much cheaper concrete could become before integrity started weakening, how many safety reports nobody actually verified carefully anymore. The industry rewarded speed, not caution. Developers called me practical, efficient, reliable. I started earning more money than I ever thought possible, and every payment made the next compromise feel smaller. Then came the Riverside Towers. 2 residential buildings, 23 floors each, hundreds of families, children, retired couples, people who trusted elevators more than stairwells because they believed the structure around them was permanent. The developer wanted faster approval on revised foundation loads. The soil near the river wasn't stable enough for the reduced supports. I knew that immediately. The calculations showed excessive long-term settling risk under stress conditions. I remember staring at those numbers late at night. And I remember something even worse. I remember understanding exactly what could happen. Cracks first, then shifting, then eventually collapse. And I approved it anyway. The first complaints arrived months later. Doors not closing properly. Hairline fractures spreading through hallway walls. Residents hearing strange sounds inside the structure at night. The company called them cosmetic issues. I signed those reports too. Then inspectors started asking harder questions. Independent reviews, material testing, foundation analysis. And suddenly, the numbers I buried years earlier surfaced again, like bodies floating upward through dark water. The arrest happened in my office. Middle of the afternoon. People typing quietly nearby while federal investigators placed documents in front of me, one after another. Original calculations, revised calculations, approval signatures, my signatures. I remember one investigator asking a question softly enough that it almost sounded sympathetic. How many people did you think were acceptable to risk? At night in prison, I still dream about that blinking cursor sometimes. Not the courtroom, not the sentencing. The cursor. because that was the exact point where the future still could have changed. And I knew it. That's the worst part. I knew it even then. The woman in the next cell starts crying every Thursday night again. And sometimes, lying awake beneath fluorescent prison lights, I wonder how many families are sleeping right now inside buildings that haven't cracked yet.